At my daughter's Thanksgiving dinner, my son-in-law's mother grabbed Claire's wrist hard enough to leave marks and told her, in front of everyone at the table, to go back to the trailer park she came from. My son-in-law kept eating. He didn't even put down his fork. My 3-year-old grandson started crying. I reached over, set my napkin beside my plate, and said, "Excuse me a moment." I walked to the garage. My hands were steady. After 38 years, your hands stay steady. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. Before we go further, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. It means more than you know. I hadn't seen my daughter in 6 weeks when Claire called to invite me to Thanksgiving. The call itself was unusual. She always texted. A phone call from Claire meant something was either very good or very wrong, and the careful way she framed the invitation told me which one it was. "Ryan's mother is coming," she said. "She wants the whole family together. I told her you'd be there." A pause. "Please be there, Dad." I told her I would. I always tell her I will, and I always mean it. I drove from my house in Maryville down to their place in Brentwood that Wednesday evening to help set up, the way I always did when Claire hosted anything. The drive takes about 45 minutes if traffic cooperates on I-40, and I used those 45 minutes the way I'd used long drives for 4 decades. I observed. I prepared. I considered what I was walking into. The house was everything mine wasn't. 6,000 square feet of stone and glass sitting on 2 acres off Concord Road, purchased with help from Ryan's mother, Vivian Calloway, who had made sure Claire knew exactly how much that help had cost and what it meant she owed. The Calloway Property Group logo appeared on a tasteful sign near the front gate, the way a cattle brand appears on livestock. Vivian believed in marking her territory. Claire opened the door before I reached it. She'd been watching from the window. I hugged her and held on a little longer than usual. She let me. When I stepped back, I looked at her the way fathers look at daughters when they're trying to see past what's being shown. What I saw tightened something in my chest. She'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. There were shadows under her eyes that foundation hadn't quite covered. When she smiled, it arrived half a second too late, practiced rather than felt. "Thanks for coming early," she said. "I need the help." "You always have my help," I said. "That's never going to change." We worked in the kitchen for 2 hours, Claire and I, falling into the rhythm we'd had since she was 9 years old and helping me cook on weekends. She'd always been comfortable in kitchens, always been the kind of person who made food as a way of taking care of people. She'd cooked Thanksgiving dinner for her whole dorm floor in college. She'd catered her own graduation party because she said it was more fun than sitting back and watching someone else do it. The woman moving through this kitchen was quieter than that girl, more careful. She measured things twice, apologized for small errors before anyone noticed them, and flinched slightly when she heard a car in the driveway. "Ryan's home," she said. Not with warmth, with calculation. My son-in-law came in through the garage, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other, eyes on the screen. He acknowledged me the way you acknowledge furniture. "Frank," he said, still looking at his phone. "Not Dad. Not even Mr. Kavanaugh. Just my first name, delivered like a receipt." He kissed Claire on the cheek without looking at her and went upstairs to change. My grandson Noah came barreling down the hallway a few seconds later, 3 years old and running full speed the way 3-year-olds run, which is faster than physics should allow. He crashed into my legs and wrapped both arms around my knees. "Papa Frank, Papa Frank." His face was turned up at me, round and certain, the way a child's face looks when they're completely sure of their welcome. I've been waiting and waiting and waiting. I crouched down and hugged him properly. He smelled like applesauce and something crayon adjacent. "I've been waiting and waiting and waiting too," I told him. He laughed. It was the realest sound in that house. Vivian Calloway arrived at 11 the next morning, Thanksgiving Day, 45 minutes before she'd said she would. This was not an accident. Vivian operated on the principle that arriving before people were ready gave her an advantage, and she was the kind of person who needed advantages the way other people needed oxygen. She had the look of a woman who had spent considerable money making sure she looked like a woman who didn't need to spend considerable money. Her clothes were understated and expensive. Her jewelry was minimal and significant. She ran Callaway Property Group, a Nashville real estate development firm with fingers in commercial, residential, and a few other pies she didn't advertise. She mentioned the company within 3 minutes of every conversation, the way people mention a credential they're afraid you might forget. "Frank," she said when she saw me. Her smile was the same temperature as the November air outside. "I didn't realize you were coming for the full holiday." "Claire asked me to help," I said. "How thoughtful of you." The way she said thoughtful suggested it was anything but. She moved past me into the kitchen, surveyed the preparations with the expression of a health inspector, and began offering Claire suggestions that weren't suggestions. The gravy needed more depth. The table placement was off. The centerpiece Claire had spent an hour arranging was moved 6 inches to the left without comment. Claire absorbed each redirect with the practiced calm of someone who had learned that resisting was more expensive than complying. Ryan's younger brother came with his girlfriend, Ryan's college friend and his wife, an aunt from Vivian's side, who said very little but watched everything. They filled the dining room with the specific noise of people performing family rather than being it. I watched. I listened. I noted. Noah was everywhere, the way 3-year-olds are everywhere. Curious and uncontained and delightful to everyone except Vivian, who corrected him with the regularity of a metronome. "Don't run. Don't shout. Sit still. Use your napkin. Proper boys don't. Proper boys should." After the 4th correction in 20 minutes, Noah started doing something I'd never seen him do. He started checking. Before he moved, he glanced at Vivian to see if it was allowed. He was 3 years old and already learning to make himself smaller. That particular thing settled in my chest and stayed there. Dinner itself was a masterclass in what I had spent nearly 4 decades studying: patterns of control, the way a dominant personality reshapes a room. Vivienne sat at the head of a table she didn't own in a house she had bought the right to consider hers, and she conducted the meal like an orchestra in which every instrument played to her tempo. She critiqued Claire's turkey, kindly. She redirected conversations that didn't interest her, smoothly. She praised Ryan's career accomplishments in a way that implied Claire had contributed nothing to them. She mentioned twice that Claire hadn't come from this kind of background, both times framed as a compliment, both times landing like the opposite. I ate. I observed. I kept my expression pleasant, and my assessments internal. Old habit. 38 years of it. Claire had made her mother's sweet potato casserole, a recipe that had been in my late wife's family for 3 generations. It was the one dish at that table that meant something. When Vivienne pushed it aside, untouched, and said, "A little rustic for my taste," Claire said nothing. She just rearranged her fork. I thought about my wife, Ellen, about what she would have said. Ellen had never been afraid of saying things. After the main course, while the table was being cleared, Noah came running in from the living room with a plastic dinosaur he'd found in his toy box and wanted to show me. He was excited, the way children are excited about dinosaurs. Completely and unreservedly, Vivian's voice stopped him in the doorway. "Noah, we don't run at the table. I want to show Papa Frank. Your grandfather can wait. What have I told you about interrupting adult conversation?" Noah looked at me with an expression that was working very hard not to be sad. I smiled at him. He took a careful step into the room and held up the dinosaur. "It's a brachiosaurus," he whispered, "because they have the long necks." "I see that," I whispered back. "That's a very good dinosaur." Vivian's chair scraped back. "Claire." Her voice had shifted. It had the temperature of something that had been cold for a long time. "I've spoken to you about this. He needs structure. This is exactly what I mean when I tell Ryan that you're not maintaining appropriate standards in this home." Claire set down the serving dish she was holding. "He's 3, Vivienne. He just wanted to show my dad his dinosaur." The table went quiet. Ryan's brother looked at his plate. The aunt looked at the window. Ryan looked at his phone. Vivienne stood up. She wasn't a tall woman, but she had the particular quality of people who have never considered themselves anything other than the most important person in a room. She walked around the table toward Claire. "Don't take that tone with me." Her voice was very quiet. "Do you understand what Ryan has given up to be with you? What this family has invested in giving you a life you had absolutely no foundation to build yourself. She stopped in front of Claire. You came from nothing, and you are still, in so many of the ways that matter, nothing. I have tolerated it because Ryan loves you, but I will not sit at this table and watch you raise my grandson to be as undisciplined and common as you are. Claire said nothing. Her face had gone very still. Go back to whatever it is your people do. The rest of us will finish dinner like adults. Then Vivian reached out and grabbed Claire's wrist. Not a touch. A grip. Fingers closed hard, pulling her forward like a child being corrected. Claire made a small sound. Noah, standing in the doorway with his brachiosaurus, started crying. Not a tantrum. The quiet, confused kind of crying that happens when something frightens a child who doesn't yet have the words for what fear is. Ryan didn't look up from his phone. I set my napkin on the table. I placed my water glass beside it. I stood up and said, "If you'll excuse me for just a moment." Vivian looked at me with the expression she reserved for furniture that had moved without permission. "Sit down, Frank. I'll be right back," I said pleasantly. I walked through the kitchen, out the door, into the garage, and stood next to my truck in the cool dark. My hands were steady. After 38 years, they were always steady. I activated the voice recorder on my phone. Then I called Tommy Reyes. Tommy had been a field agent under my supervision for 11 years before he transferred to the FBI's Nashville field office. He was now a supervisory special agent with enough institutional memory to understand exactly what it meant when I called him. "Frank," he said, with surprise in his voice. "Been a while." "It has. I need you to know I'm recording this call. Standard procedure. Old habit. I'm a witness to an incident of physical assault. Adult female grabbed another adult female by the wrist, forcibly. Clear grip marks likely visible. 3-year-old child in the room, now in distress. Address is 1834. Whitfield Court, Brentwood. The victim is my daughter." A pause. Then, quietly, "Are you safe? The party responsible doesn't consider me relevant. She's still in the building with the victim. I'll coordinate with Brentwood PD personally. Frank, I can be there in 20 minutes. I appreciate it. I'm going back inside. I'll be recording the ongoing situation." I ended the call. I slipped the phone into my shirt pocket with the recorder still running. I walked back through the kitchen door, through the hallway, and back to the dining room. The scene had rearranged itself slightly. Claire was standing against the wall near the china cabinet, Noah pressed against her legs. Ryan had finally put down his phone and was speaking to his mother in a low voice. Vivienne was adjusting her pearl necklace with the satisfaction of a woman who felt the situation had concluded appropriately. She looked up when I returned. "I was about to send a search party," she said. "I'm sorry to keep everyone waiting," I said. "Claire, please sit down. You've been on your feet all day." Vivian's expression sharpened slightly. "I was in the middle of explaining something to your daughter." "Please," I said, "continue." She studied me for a moment. I kept my expression open, interested, entirely unthreatening. It's a skill that takes years to develop. Making yourself invisible by seeming present. She decided I wasn't worth accounting for and turned back to the table. "As I was saying," Vivian began, settling into her chair with the authority of someone reclaiming a throne, "the issue isn't about today specifically. It's about the pattern. Ryan grew up with certain standards. The expectation that those standards would be maintained in his household isn't unreasonable. And you feel that grabbing someone's wrist helps establish those standards?" I asked. The table went quiet again in a different way. Vivian's eyes came to me slowly. "I beg your pardon?" "The grip you had on Claire's wrist. The marks that will likely be visible on her wrist within the hour. I'm asking whether that's a technique you found effective." Her voice cooled to something below its usual temperature. I touched my daughter-in-law to get her attention. "That's hardly... And that's your standard response? Physical contact when someone needs correcting?" Ryan leaned forward. "Frank, I think we should all just take a breath here." "I'm very calm," I said, which was true. "You're speaking to my mother as if... I'm asking your mother a question. She's welcome to answer." Vivian's chin came up. The room had the particular quality of a space where everyone has stopped breathing. "I have raised children. I know how to handle difficult situations. What I did was entirely appropriate. And frankly, if you had raised your daughter with any kind of backbone, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I see, I said. So physical force is appropriate correction in your family. I don't expect someone with your background to understand. What background is that? A government salary and a small house in... She waved her hand dismissively. Wherever it is you live. You don't come from this world, Frank. Neither does Claire. I've made peace with that. I simply expect a certain level of adherence to. The doorbell rang. Vivienne stopped. She looked toward the foyer. Who on earth? Ryan got up, with the expression of someone who wanted to be somewhere else entirely. He opened the front door and went very still. Good evening. Tommy Reyes had a voice built for federal corridors. Supervisory Special Agent Thomas Reyes, FBI Nashville Field Office. We received a report of an incident at this address. May we come in? There were 2 Brentwood officers behind him. Ryan's voice cracked on the first syllable. FBI? This is a family dinner? There's no incident here. Tommy stepped inside with the unhurried authority of a man who has done this 10,000 times. His eyes found me immediately, and the briefest acknowledgement passed between us. Then he looked at Claire, at the marks on her wrist, already visible, already purpling slightly at the edges of Vivienne's fingerprints. He looked at Noah, who had stopped crying and was now watching with the focused attention of a 3-year-old encountering something completely new. Then Tommy looked across the room. Frank, he said, with respect. The room heard it. Tommy, I said it the way you greet a colleague you trust. Silence lasted about 6 seconds. Frank. Vivienne said my name differently than she had every time before. Something in it had shifted. Something had gone out of it. Retired. I said it before she finished forming the question. 38 years with the Bureau. The last 14 as Special Agent in Charge, Financial Crimes, before I stepped down. I looked at Tommy. I have audio recording of the incident and Miss Calloway's subsequent statements, confirming the physical contact and her position that such contact is appropriate discipline. Ryan's face had gone a color that had no real name. You were FBI? Special Agent in Charge, Tommy said. And there was something in his voice that wasn't quite pride, but lived in the same neighborhood. Frank Kavanaugh ran one of the most successful financial crimes units in the Southeast for over a decade. Took down a case last year that's still being taught at Quantico. He looked at Ryan. Sir, I'd suggest you step back. One of the Brentwood officers moved toward Vivienne, who was sitting very still in her chair, with an expression I recognized from interrogation rooms. The expression of a person who has just understood, for the first time, that the walls are not where they thought the walls were. I want to speak to my attorney, Vivienne said. That's your right, ma'am, the officer said. I need you to come with me. You have the right to remain silent. This is my son's home. Her voice had lost its architecture. I am Patricia. I am Vivienne Calloway. I own Calloway Property Group. I know the mayor of this city personally. Then he'll be a good person to call, Tommy said. Right now, I need you to step this way. They walked her toward the door. She looked back at me once. Her expression was something I'd learned to identify early in my career. The look of a person who has never genuinely believed consequences applied to them, encountering the moment they discover they do. Ryan started talking. Loud, escalating, cycling through threats the way untrained people do when they panic. Lawsuit, entrapment, career destruction, political connections. The usual vocabulary of people who confuse noise with power. Tommy gave him a look I recognized from decades of working with him. Patient, steady, clinical. Sir, I'd strongly advise you to stop speaking. Ryan kept going. The Brentwood officer documented every word of it. Old habit on their end, too. Claire was standing by the china cabinet with Noah's hand in hers. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't immediately decode. Not confusion exactly. Something more layered than that. She looked like a person watching a landscape they'd thought they understood resolve itself into completely different geography. Claire, I said, let's get your coat and Noah's things. She nodded slowly. She went. Tommy stayed behind to collect statements. I stayed to give mine, the brief version, referencing the recording. One of the Brentwood officers photographed the marks on Claire's wrist. the clear fingerprint pattern in the bruising. Then Claire gave her account quietly, methodically, the way people do when they've been waiting a long time to be asked. Noah fell asleep in his car seat 20 minutes into the drive to Maryville. The rain had started, soft and steady on the highway. 38 years, Claire said. She was looking at the road ahead. FBI. Yes, and I didn't know. I'd thought about how to answer this for a long time. Not for tonight specifically, but for whenever the moment came, because I had known eventually there would be a moment. When I joined the Bureau, you were 7 years old, I said. The work I did, the people I dealt with, some of them were the kind of people who look for leverage. Family is leverage. I kept my professional life separate to keep you and your mother safe. It wasn't about secrets for their own sake. And when Mom passed, when I was grown, by then it was just habit. And then I retired, and I was just your father. That's what I wanted to be, just your father. I kept my eyes on the rain and the highway. I didn't need you to respect the title. I needed you to know the person. She was quiet for a while. Outside, the December rain came down on Tennessee in the way it does, gray and patient and indifferent to the things people are sorting out inside their cars. All those times Vivienne called you a small-town nobody, Claire said. People show you who they are when they think you're powerless, I said. She showed me exactly who she was. So did Ryan. Another silence. Noah made a small sound in his sleep. Some dream negotiation with something pleasant. What happens now? Claire asked. Tomorrow morning, you'll give a formal statement to Brentwood PD. The audio recording I made provides clear documentation of the assault and her subsequent admissions. I kept my voice the way I kept my hands. Steady. Vivienne will likely be charged with assault and battery. Given the physical evidence and the recording, prosecution should be straightforward. And Ryan, that depends on choices you make, but I think you already know what those choices are. She nodded once, slow and private, the way people nod when they're confirming something they've known for a long time but haven't been ready to say out loud. My house on Reed Creek Road is not impressive from the outside. 3 bedrooms, half an acre, a garage I converted into an office years ago full of old case files, and a woodworking setup I've been meaning to actually use since I retired. Vivienne had referred to it twice that evening as Frank's little place, which in her vocabulary was the equivalent of a dismissal. Inside, I set up the guest room for Claire and put Noah's portable crib in the corner. He transferred from the car seat to the crib without waking up, which is a miracle that only children and the profoundly tired can perform. Claire stood in the doorway watching him breathe. I should have left years ago, she said, not to me specifically. To the room, to herself, to some accounting she'd been running in the background for a long time. You're not leaving anything now, I said. You're arriving somewhere. My phone had been buzzing since we got in the car. I'd felt it and ignored it until now. I stepped into the kitchen and checked the messages. 12 of them, various sources. Word traveled fast even in retirement when your name got said in front of enough people. The one I needed was from a former colleague named Patricia Warren, who now ran a family law practice in Nashville. Patricia had sat across from me in an FBI conference room 19 years ago when we were both in our 40s and both certain we understood how the world worked, and she'd been right about it more often than almost anyone I'd worked with. Her message said, "Saw Tommy's after-action note. Available whenever Claire needs representation. No charge, Frank. Just call." I showed it to Claire when she came to the kitchen. She read it. She covered her mouth with one hand for a moment. Then she sat down at the table and cried the way people cry when they've been holding it back for a long time and finally reach a place safe enough to let it go. I made tea. I let her cry. These are things fathers do. The formal statement process the next morning was thorough. Patricia Warren came to the Brentwood police station and sat beside Claire for every minute of it. Tommy's team had already processed my audio recording overnight. The quality was clear enough that you could hear Vivienne's breathing between sentences. You could hear Noah crying in the background. By that afternoon, Vivienne Calloway was formally charged with assault and battery. The DA's office flagged it as a domestic violence-related charge given the context, which affected the processing. Ryan arrived at the station with a private attorney, demanding access to Claire. Claire was within her legal rights to decline, and she declined. Ryan escalated in the parking lot, making threats in a voice loud enough to be captured on the station's exterior cameras. His attorney eventually got him into a car and away from the building, but not before he'd comprehensively documented his own instability for anyone who might later need documentation of it. In the following days, I made calls, not to influence anything improperly. 38 years builds you a certain understanding of how systems connect, what information flows where, which doors open with which keys. I'd spent my career following those connections. I hadn't forgotten them. The Tennessee Real Estate Commission received documentation I'd been quietly assembling for 2 years regarding complaints I'd heard from former colleagues in Nashville's construction and development community about Callaway. Property group, permit irregularities, contractor disputes. 3 separate complaints from buyers about undisclosed foundation issues in residential properties. None of it fabricated, all of it properly routed. A former counterpart at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division called me on a Thursday, 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. "Frank," he said, "that situation with the property company you mentioned. Our people found some things that needed closer attention. Income reporting anomalies, going back 5 years at minimum. We're opening a formal review. I appreciate you letting me know," I said. I hung up and went back to my woodworking. Claire watched from the kitchen doorway that evening while I was making notes. She'd taken to sitting in the office doorway the way she had as a child, watching me work. "Dad," she said, "did you do all of this?" "I reported existing violations to appropriate authorities," I said. "Vivienne built her business on shortcuts and convenience. I didn't create those problems. I made sure they received the attention they'd always deserved." "Is it right to use what you know this way?" I set down my pen. This was a question I'd asked myself throughout my career, in different forms, about different circumstances. The answer I'd landed on after 38 years was the only honest one I had. "I never fabricated anything," I said. "I never applied pressure to produce a false outcome. I identified existing crimes and ensured they reached the proper channels. That's what I did for 4 decades, Claire. I'm still doing it. The only thing that changed is I'm doing it for you." She was quiet for a while. "I've been offered a job," she said. "Assistant Communications Director for a nonprofit in Nashville. Children's advocacy." She paused. "I've been too scared to take it." "What are you scared of?" She thought about it. "That I've forgotten who I am." "You haven't," I said. "You've been practicing being someone else for a few years. That's not the same thing." The divorce proceedings began in February. Patricia Warren was precise and thorough in the way that good attorneys are, which is to say, she missed nothing and conceded nothing and filed everything correctly and on time. She documented the pattern of financial control Ryan had maintained over Claire throughout their marriage. The accounts Claire had no access to, the credit cards issued in her name that she'd never held, the salary increases Ryan had received that never appeared in their shared finances. When Patricia's team subpoenaed Callaway Property Group's internal financial records, what they found was not what anyone had predicted, except possibly me. Ryan had been running a secondary income stream through a commercial real estate deal his mother had fronted for him, a deal that involved significant misrepresentation of property values, and a buyer who was now talking to a federal attorney. The numbers were substantial. The documentation was clear. Ryan was arrested on a Tuesday morning in March, walking out of his office building on Charlotte Avenue. He was charged with wire fraud and bank fraud. The amounts involved federal jurisdiction. He called Claire from booking. She let it go to voicemail. Vivienne's trial was scheduled for April. I sat in the gallery and watched her enter with her attorney, a polished man named Harrington, who had a reputation in Nashville for working expensive and well. He was very good. The prosecutor, a methodical young man named Daniel Park, was better. He played my recording. The courtroom heard Vivienne's voice, precise and unhurried, explaining to the dining room that a woman who came from nothing remained nothing regardless of circumstance. They heard the grip, the sound Claire made, Noah crying in the background. They heard Vivienne, afterward, in my presence, confirm that she considered physical correction appropriate and had employed it before. The judge, a woman in her late 50s who had the look of someone who had heard everything and been surprised by nothing in several years, listened to all of it without visible expression. She found Vivian guilty on the primary charge. Sentencing was 18 months probation, mandatory counseling, community service, and permanent placement on the state's domestic violence offender registry. Callaway Property Group's real estate license was suspended, pending the completion of the Tennessee Real Estate Commission's review. Outside the courthouse, Harrington approached me. He was the kind of attorney who knew when a fight was over, which made him better than most. "Agent Kavanaugh," he said, "I'm told you recorded the initial incident." "Special agent, retired," I said. "And yes," he nodded slowly. "They said you were thorough. I try to be." Ryan's case resolved in early summer with a guilty plea to federal wire fraud. 3 years in a minimum security federal facility. Full financial restitution required. His portion of Callaway Property Group was seized as part of asset forfeiture proceedings. The IRS investigation confirmed substantial unreported income and assessed significant penalties against Vivienne personally, above and beyond what the company owed. The divorce was finalized the same week Ryan was sentenced. Claire left the courthouse and called me from the steps. "It's done," she said. "I know," Tommy had texted me. "I'm okay," she said. "Actually, I'm better than okay. I don't know what word there is for this." "Relief," I said. "Yes," she said. "That's the word. Relief." Noah and Claire moved into a rental house in East Nashville in July. Close enough for weekly dinners, far enough for independence. She painted Noah's room the color he chose, which was an assertive orange that I privately thought was a lot to wake up to every morning, but which he loved with the complete conviction that 3-year-olds bring to color preferences. She took the job at the nonprofit. Noah started at a new preschool where, according to Claire, he had already become the de facto president of the playground through a combination of enthusiasm and diplomacy that reminded me of no one so much as his grandmother Ellen, who had run every room she'd ever been in, using the same tools. I returned to my routines. Morning coffee on the porch, afternoon walks along the creek, monthly lunches with Tommy and former colleagues who still called me Frank, even though half of them technically owed me a sir. The woodworking, finally and genuinely, began to produce things rather than just shavings. On an October afternoon, Patricia Warren called. "Frank, I thought you'd want to know. Vivian Callaway has been in regular contact with her probation officer and her counselor. She's completing her community service hours at a women's shelter in Nashville. By all accounts, she's taking it seriously. I considered that. Rehabilitation as a genuine process rather than a performance was something I'd seen rarely enough in my career that it still surprised me when it appeared. And Ryan settled in. No contact with Claire or Noah. Condition of his plea agreement. "Good," I said. "Thank you, Patricia." I sat for a while in my office after hanging up, surrounded by the things 4 decades of federal service leaves behind. Framed letters from directors. A photograph with a former attorney general taken at a commendation ceremony in Washington. The badge I'd turned in at my last day, returned to me as a retirement gift, sitting in a frame above the filing cabinet. None of it compared to the drawing Noah had made last week and insisted on mailing to me through the actual postal service, which he considered magical. 3 figures in crayon. Big one on the left with gray hair. Small one in the middle. Medium one on the right. Above them, large yellow circles that might have been stars, or possibly just the things his hand made when he was thinking about something else. On the bottom, in letters that only partially cooperated with the concept of a straight line, Papa Frank and U.S. I had put it on the refrigerator where I would see it every morning. Thanksgiving came around again the way it does, without asking permission, and this year Claire hosted it in her East Nashville house, with the orange room in the backyard that was still more mud than yard, but had ambitions. Tommy and his wife came. Patricia Warren and her husband came. 2 of Claire's friends from the nonprofit came with their kids, who formed an immediate alliance with Noah, and spent most of the afternoon in the backyard conducting experiments that involved mud and gravity, and the hypothesis that the laws of physics could be negotiated with enough enthusiasm. Claire cooked her mother's sweet potato casserole. She set it in the center of the table and didn't apologize for it or explain it or wait for anyone to evaluate it. She just put it down and went back for the turkey. I watched her from the doorway of the kitchen with a sensation that I'd spent most of my adult life being too busy to properly identify. It was something in the vicinity of complete. After dinner, Noah dragged me to the backyard to show me something he'd found. A frog, it turned out, large and cooperative, sitting at the edge of the mud patch with the dignity of an animal who had nowhere to be. His name is Gerald, Noah announced. How do you know it's a Gerald? He considered this with the seriousness it deserved. He looks like a Gerald. I could not argue with that. Claire came out and stood beside me while Noah conducted a very earnest introduction to Gerald for anyone who would listen. The October evening was cooling down, the way Nashville evenings do when fall finally arrives with intentions instead of just suggestions. Somewhere in the neighborhood, someone was burning leaves. I want to tell you something I've been working out how to say, Claire said. Take your time. You sat through years of it, she said. Vivian calling you a nobody. Ryan treating you like you weren't worth the air in the room. The comments about where you lived, what you drove, who you were. She paused. You never corrected them. You never once said a word. And I used to wonder if maybe they were getting to you and you just weren't showing it. They weren't, I said. I know that now, but I want to understand why. You could have said something at any point, pulled out a credential, made them understand who they were talking to. I watched Noah and Gerald reach an accord regarding personal space. Because the moment I corrected them, I'd have been engaging on their terms, I said. They valued titles and square footage and the appearance of power. If I defended myself using those same currencies, I'd have been confirming that those currencies were what mattered. I paused. They weren't. What mattered was whether I knew who I was. I did. I didn't need them to know it. Claire was quiet for a while. Power doesn't have to be displayed to be real, she said. That's what you taught me this year. You taught yourself. I just provided the conditions. She laughed a little. That's very FBI of you. Old habit. Noah looked up from his Gerald negotiations. Papa Frank, did you know frogs breathe through their skin? I did not know that, I said. They do. My teacher said so. That's why you have to have wet hands before you pick them up, so you don't hurt their skin breathing. That's very important information. He nodded, satisfied. I have a lot of important information. He did. He absolutely did. A letter arrived in November, forwarded through Patricia Warren's office. Vivian's handwriting on the envelope, neat and controlled in a way that had clearly cost her effort. I read it first, the way I read everything first, with the particular attention of someone who has spent a career evaluating text for what it says and what it's trying not to say. It was genuine. I had read enough of both kinds to know the difference. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't explain herself. She described, in plain language, the woman she had spent 70 years becoming, and the specific ways in which that woman had caused harm to people who deserved better. She wrote about the shelter where she was completing her service hours, about the women she'd met there, about recognizing in their circumstances elements of the dynamics she had perpetuated in her own family. She wrote about Ryan and her own role in making him who he was, which was the hardest part to read and probably the hardest part for her to write. At the end, she wrote that she didn't expect anything from Claire or from Noah. She wasn't writing to ask for anything. She wrote only to say that she understood now, and that understanding had cost her enough that she felt it might matter to someone that she'd arrived at it. I brought the letter to Claire. She read it at her kitchen table with Noah, doing something creative and loud in the next room. She read it twice. When she put it down, she pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Is it real? She asked. I believe so. I could be wrong. Time will clarify. She nodded slowly. I'm going to put it somewhere safe. I'm not ready to decide about it yet. That's the right call. Ryan's letter arrived 3 weeks later, also through Patricia Warren. Claire read it, handed it to me, and I read it. It was the other kind. It cataloged external pressures. It described his upbringing as mitigating circumstance. It suggested that Claire's behavior throughout their marriage had created conditions that made everything that followed understandable, if not quite his responsibility. It ended with a paragraph about his intention to be a presence in Noah's life going forward, framed as a rights assertion rather than a desire. Claire took it back, folded it in half, and put it in the recycling bin. "Some people change," she said. "Some people don't. That's a lesson it takes most people much longer to learn." She smiled. I had good instruction. December brought cold weather and Noah's 4th birthday, which was celebrated with the kind of maximalist enthusiasm that 4-year-olds require, and that Claire delivered completely, including a dinosaur cake that was technically impressive and scientifically accurate, which Noah told every guest about in detail. After the cake, after the guests, after Noah was in bed exhausted from the weight of being 4, Claire and I sat at her kitchen table with the mugs she'd bought at a craft fair, hand-thrown pottery in a color that was somewhere between blue and green, and had no official name. "He told me yesterday he wants to be a scientist," Claire said, "or possibly a dinosaur. He's keeping his options open." "Smart," I said. She turned her mug in her hands. "Dad, I want to ask you something I should have asked years ago." "Go ahead." "Were you proud of your work?" "The FBI. All those years." I thought about it the way I tried to think about the things that deserved a real answer. "I was proud of the work," I said. "I was less certain about some of the costs. You spend that long doing that kind of work, and you carry things. You miss things at home. You are present in rooms where terrible things have happened, and you take pieces of that with you." I looked at my mug. What I'm proud of now is different. It's simpler. "What is it?" I looked toward the hallway, where Noah was asleep in his orange room with his dinosaur books, arranged by size, the way he liked them. I looked at my daughter, who had cut her hair recently and stopped apologizing for her weight and started laughing the way she'd laughed at 20, which was loudly and without checking to see if anyone found it appropriate. "This," I said, "this is what I'm proud of now." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. We sat like that for a while, in the kitchen of a house she'd built herself on a street in East Nashville, with the December wind doing its work outside, and the comfortable quiet of a family that had come through something and was still here. A few weeks into January, Tommy called me with an update. Ryan had requested early release consideration. His attorney had filed the paperwork. The federal judge handling his case had denied the request on the grounds that insufficient time had been served and restitution was substantially incomplete. Vivian had completed her probation requirements ahead of schedule. Her real estate license had been reinstated with conditions. She was still at the shelter, apparently, beyond her required hours. The program director had written a letter on her behalf that Tommy had forwarded to me without comment. I read it. I forwarded it to Patricia Warren to pass along to Claire, with a note that said only, "For your file, when you're ready." On a Saturday in February, Noah and Claire came to Maryville for the weekend. We went for a walk along the creek, the 3 of us, Noah between us, holding both our hands and swinging himself forward occasionally, the way children do when they're sure the people holding them won't let go. "Papa Frank," Noah said, at some point in the middle of the walk. "Yeah, buddy. When I'm old like you, will I know everything?" Claire made a sound that was half laugh, half something more tender than that. "No," I told him honestly, "but you'll know more than you do now, and some of what you know will turn out to be wrong, and you'll have to update it. That's actually the good part." He thought about this with the gravity it deserved. "Okay," he said finally. "That sounds okay." He started swinging himself forward again, confident in the hands holding him, not particularly worried about any of the rest of it. The creek moved alongside us, cold and clear, and doing what it had done for longer than anyone currently walking beside it could calculate. The trees were bare, but there was something in the light that had started to change, the way light in February changes when the days are getting longer, even though you still can't quite feel it yet. That was the part I'd learned to trust over 65 years of paying attention. The change that's already happening before you can see it. The turning that's already underway before it arrives. Justice, I had learned, was not a moment. It was a process. It was the steady, patient work of following proper channels, documenting what you witnessed, trusting that systems built for accountability would account. It was the long, quiet work of holding your position while other people revealed who they were. And when the moment came that required action, acting, not from anger, not for display, simply because someone needed protecting, and you were in a position to provide it. And that was enough reason. Noah found a stick he considered excellent and began cataloging it. Claire walked beside me in the winter light, shoulders easy, jaw unclenched, present in the way she hadn't been for years. I put my arm around her. She leaned into it the way she had at 7, at 12, at 20. The way it turns out people don't stop doing when they trust someone. They just stop doing it when trust has been damaged, and they start again when it's been repaired. "Thank you for that call," she said, on Thanksgiving. "I've been making that call my whole career," I said. "This one just happened to be the most important one." She nodded. Ahead of us, Noah had named the stick Gerald II and was introducing it to a rock. The creek moved. The light held. The day continued. Ordinary and ordinary and ordinary, which is another word for everything I had ever actually wanted. If this story moved you at all, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to Shadow Vengeance. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for being here.